Today on Cloud Security Lab a Week, we are not going to learn about double negatives. Today's lab is really short to implement, but it covers a bunch of really important principles, some of which we've talked about a little bit before and some that are new. What we're going to do is learn how to lock out Amazon regions that we aren't using. We're going to do that with service control policies, and we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the idiosyncrasies. That's not the right word. We're going to learn about the granularity of those policies and some of the cool features of the policy language. And that's the same language that's shared across organization, identity, and resource policies. Okay, let's go to the whiteboard here really quick and just remind you of a few things about regions. So if you recall, regions are geographically distributed, and a way to think about regions, the simple way is as a data center. And let's say we have this one here, which is, we're going to call it Oregon, which is US West 2, and that's where we're doing most of our work. We have Virginia, which is US East 1, which let me put that in because that's going to be really important to remember. That one over there. And then we have let's pick Frankfurt. And I think it's EU Central 1. I probably could have looked that up ahead of time. And Central 1. All right, so if we look across these regions, there's some important things to understand, concepts about regions. Regions are all not an individual data center, the way that we were kind of thinking about it, but a region is a collection of data centers. And now we're going to my hand-drawn instead of using the actual shape boxes there. It's a collection of data centers that all are connected over a high-speed backbone. So they're in that same geographic region, and it's kind of like, if you think about it, a bit of a local area network. Regions are also connected to each other on Amazon's backbone. And that's more of the wide area network. And guess what? I'm putting dollar signs on this because they're going to charge you more for using a global backbone that's more like the internet itself. It's not. It's their own private backbone, but they still have to get that running all over the world. And so if we're thinking about the local area network, we're still paying for what we use, but it's $1 sign, or the backbone is going to be multiple dollar signs. Now, although we have that backbone and regions can communicate with each other, they generally don't. So the only time that they will talk to each other is when we make deliberate connections to them. And it's kind of fascinating how this works a little bit because I'm going to draw a little stick figure on the bottom here. So here's little old me on the bottom. And if I go to make API calls into those regions, if I want to say, run an instance in this region up here. Oops, let me get to my colors here. If I want to run an instance up in Virginia, I actually need to make that API call to Virginia itself. And that's going to be either through the web console or the API, and it's just going to go to Virginia. If I want to run one over in Oregon, I'm actually connecting. So when we do that change of regions in the user interface, that's actually moving us to basically an entirely different web console over there. But if you recall, there's some services that are listed as global services. And the most important of those global services is IAM. That's one we use all the time. And if you call in the console, it just says in the upper right-hand corner when we go to that service, not global, but global is what appears up in that little box up there. That global service, it turns out, just runs in US East 1. And most global services, I think all of them, to my knowledge, run in US East 1, but I don't know that for sure, so I'm not going to entirely assume it. So that's really important for us to keep in mind, because what we want to do today is we're going to write a policy that restricts us to just Oregon, just US East 1, and also make sure that all global services are able to run. And we're going to do all of that with our handy friends, the service control policy. So let's slide over. You could kind of see I was moving in that direction anyway. And we'll zoom in a little bit. And let's look at the service control policy that we're going to use for today. And let me get synced up over here on the actual whiteboard. So this is the service control policy and a couple of reminders. Sitting above this policy that we already have is an allow all. And that allow all policy is because service control policies only take away what you can do. They don't grant you new permissions. So we need this allow all because otherwise, just by turning on the service, we'd actually block every API call in every account in every region. So we have that allow all to allow things. And then we layered in our other one, our protect org and root, which was a deny policy. It denied any action by root, and it denied the leave org API call. And I think we looked at that again last week if you're following these things in order. So we have our allow all policy, and then we have our other policy over here, which blocks root and blocks leaving the org. Now what we want to do is a little more complicated because we want to disable any API call in regions we aren't using, but make sure that global services can still run absolutely everywhere. Now, I do think because all of them are in US East 1, by enabling US East 1, we should be safe, but let's not automatically assume that. So we're going to go ahead and explicitly allow the global services. To do all of this, though, and the way we're doing it, think about it. If the policy denies everything, we have that allow all policy in, and now we want to take permissions away, and we only want to take them away for some regions, but we still want to allow some API calls to run in every region. It gets a little bit complex. The nice thing is thanks to a couple of tricks of the Amazon policy language, it's not hard to write this, but it does take a little mental gymnastics because we're going to use a double negative, which is what we opened this with. So let's look at the policy that we've got here. And I'm going to cross out the stuff that doesn't matter. We're not going to care about the version or the statement. There is just one statement for this. And if you recall, every single statement has three things. It has an effect, which is allow or deny. It has an action, which is the list of the API calls. So it's a check or block. And then it's the list of API calls. And then it has a resource, which is what can it work on? And it has conditions. And we're going to get to those in a minute. You'll notice, though, that instead of action, in this policy, we have not action. So we are going to deny. So that's our -1, which means block. Not action. What does this mean? This double negative means block except these. And that's why we have to word it that way. Now, why are we even doing it? Why wouldn't we just say, just allow all the things we want to allow? Well, here's a couple of things. Generally, you want to use deny statements more than allow statements because deny statements, any deny statement will override any allow statements in all of the policies together. And so if we said, only allow these services in these regions, there'd really be no way to enforce that because somebody could just add another policy someplace else that actually gave them that allow permission. They could even do that at that IAM level. So these double negatives are really good for us to say, allow everything except this or deny everything except this. And so in this case, we're denying everything except these. This list here is a list of the global services. Now, look, we're not going to use all of these in our labs. I'm probably never going to use Chime, which is their video conferencing service. It has nothing to do with the kinds of labs that we're going to do here. That said, it's just easier, unless you know for sure. I want to teach you the most fundamental, foundational way of doing this, as opposed to getting really into the details and giving you something that's only going to work for these labs. All right, so we're going to scroll down. And as I said before, we're going to have our resources. And in this case, it's going to be everything. So every resource. And then this is the other little block here with the other part of the double negative. We have our string not equals. And the string is, so it's going to be not this region. And then it's, West 2 and East 1. Okay, so let's add all of these pieces together And I'm going to form the sentence that's going to describe what's going on here, because it is a little complicated the first time you do this. And so what we've got is deny every API except these. And this is that big list over here. Then, unless the region is US West 1 or US West 2. And so that's what this means. So deny NotAction. All of those API calls, and then string not equals. So it's basically unless the region equals those. Hopefully that makes sense. This is confusing, and it was confusing the first time that I went through and I learned how to write policies like this. But again, this is really solid, because it doesn't matter how many allow policies that somebody tries to add and put into place. It's going to deny every API call except those API calls and every region except those regions. That's why, because that deny statement is more powerful than the allow statement. And that's why we want to use these frequently. So that's the quick overview of this. And go ahead, email me if you have more questions. We are going to come back to these topics. And if you need a little bit more time with it, go ahead and read the blog post. But let's just see how to go ahead and do it. And it's actually only going to take us like 5 minutes or less to implement the policy. Honestly, this lab might take less than 5 minutes for this part, but I really want you to spend the time to understand that policy language. Okay, log into your identity center, then go to your management account and pick administrator access. Now, this next part will probably not shock you at all. We're going to go to AWS organizations. From within organizations, we can go straight into policies. And in policies, we'll go to service control policies. And we have our two that were there, our allow everything and then deny our use of the root and leaving the organization. Let's create a new one. And I'm going to call this region lockout. And it's going to block all regions except US West 2 and US East 1 or global services. Again, they run out of US East 1, but we do want to call them out specifically. Now, if you scroll down here, you've got the basic box for the policy language. We're not going to build the policy. I already have that for you. And I didn't get this myself. I took it from Amazon's documentation. Let me pull this out. So this policy here, and if you go into the blog post, it'll be under the step-by-step. And I've got the link there as well where you can find it in Amazon's documentation. But this is their recommended version. I've just made some changes to it for our labs. Mostly it's that I put in the regions that we wanted to allow. Otherwise, there was another little thing that they demonstrate in there that we didn't need, so I pulled that part out. Then I go into the box here and I paste. I'm going to double check, just make sure good. I've got that brace on the first side and I have it on the bottom there. I don't need to add any more statements. So I scroll down, create policy. So again, all I did was copy it from the blog post and paste it into this new policy called region lockout. But we have to apply this policy because right now it's sitting there. It's not applied to anything. So we're going to click on the checkbox and go attach policy. Since we want to block the regions everywhere, we're going to just click on root, and all of our organizational units now will inherit this. Now remember, service control policies won't block actions in the management account. And we attach the policy. Now, how can we go and check this? Well, I'm logged into an account, and in the management account, let's just click on that down arrow And oops, sorry. Instead of global there, let's go ahead and pick. Oh, we can't do that because we're in a service that's global. So let's go to services and cloud S3. We'll just do simple queue service. The reason for that is S3 itself is also a global service, so we wouldn't want to pick that. So I'm in Oregon, I'm in S3. I can click on this and I can bounce to other regions. And if I go to hit the dashboard and look at queues, I don't get any errors or anything there. Okay, now that's because we're in the management account. Well, we have another account that we can go test this in. So I'm going to click the down arrow and just sign out. That signs me out of this account. It doesn't sign me out from the portal. Let's go to our log archive and hit administrator access. So now I'm logged into log archive in US East 1, and let's go to Northern California, US West 1. And if I go into EC2, oh, you already saw errors were starting to pop up. Bam, API errors all over the place because I have blocked all the regional actions. However, if I click that down arrow and I go back to one of the regions like Oregon where we're doing all of our work, I do not get those errors. That's it. So we now have a service control policy in place that locks out every region except US East 1 and US West 2. And it also makes sure that all of our global services are running. We did that by taking that service control policy and putting in that double negative. We said, don't allow any API calls except these API calls anywhere except these regions. So we actually have two double negatives in our statement there. Hope that made sense, and look forward to digging into this a little bit more because there's a lot of other really cool, crazy stuff we can do with policy language that we're going to get into over the coming months. Have a great week.